Did you know that the most infamous shiny hunt in all of Pokemon isn't actually as difficult as most people tell you? I'm here to confirm that this is true, and somehow it makes everything worse. Let's talk about it. When you shiny hunt, there's a general implication with the activity that you're looking for something rare. The typical hunt has you grinding away, looking at a sea of sameness as you scan over the regularly colored Pokemon, culminating in a hit of endorphins when you finally uncover new pigments and sparkles. Different methods vary in difficulty, and your average hunting time can be all over the place. It could take minutes, it could take hours, it could take days. You do enough big hunts, and the question naturally emerges: how bad can it get? What is the hardest Pokemon to shiny hunt? And of course, the follow-up question, if you're a sicko like me, how do I start? It turns out that the hardest shiny hunt is a pretty subjective label. In general, I'm looking for the hardest individual Pokemon to hunt across all the games. For example, it is absolutely brutal going for a shiny roaming Pokemon, but you can get them with easier methods. I'm looking for a face that I can put on a wanted poster. Number 1 is so wildly hard that it is in its own universe. It is a Generation 4 Pokemon, but not even the new Gen 4 remakes could save us. BDSP kept it shiny locked, and it's still nowhere to be seen in Pokemon Go, even with the Sinnoh event. To this day, all you need to do is ask the rest of YouTube what the hardest shiny hunt is to hear its name at the top, over and over and over again.
This is the hardest of them all. We have Manaphy. I would consider this to be the hardest shiny to go for.
For the number 1 hardest Pokemon to shiny hunt, the Pokemon Ranger Manaphy.
Number 1, I'm sure you guys all saw this coming if you've seen difficult shiny hunts before, but shiny Manaphy.
Manaphy. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, Manaphy is not actually as hard to hunt for as most people say. In fact, based on how people originally understood the hunt almost 20 years ago, it seemed essentially impossible. Here's how the legend goes. Prior to various event distributions, which were all shiny locked, Manaphy was bizarrely a Pokemon that was only obtainable via a spin-off game. By completing the main story of Pokemon Ranger, you then have the ability to redeem a code, which gives you a mission, which lets you redeem a special egg, which can then be transferred into the Generation 4 main series games if you have 2 Nintendo DSs to do so. The egg is very unique in that you can only redeem 1 per cartridge. You're hearing that right. Once you've produced a Manaphy egg, your cartridge can never produce another one, even if you reset your save file and replay through the entire game. So in theory, we're looking at beating a dozen or so hour game in order to hatch 1 egg at full odds, hoping for a shiny. On paper, the only way to continue the hunt would be to acquire a completely fresh copy of Pokemon Ranger and do it all over again. It is not in any realm reasonable to assume that someone has both the time and funds to replay new Pokemon Ranger copies an average of 8,000 times. Maybe some lucky soul out there has generated a rare as a golden ticket shiny Manaphy and kept it over the years, but in general, at those odds and this method, you can consider Manaphy unhuntable. At least you'd think. But as we've seen time and time again in the shiny hunting community, there are ways around the impossible. You can shiny hunt for Manaphy. It is possible. Here's how it really works. Buckle up, because there is so much more to this hunt than you'd ever imagine, and there are so many ways to optimize it. First things first, when you transfer the Manaphy egg and hatch it, it will never be shiny. Wait, that's just worse. How do you... Let me re-emphasize. Manaphy will never be shiny in the first game you transfer it to from Pokemon Ranger. See, I think they intended to shiny lock the Manaphy egg, but they made a decision that actually makes it huntable. In Manaphy's case, the code is written as, your Manaphy egg will never hatch as a shiny in the game that you first transfer it to. The precise details for how shiny Pokemon are determined in Gen 3 onward are annoyingly complicated to explain in full, but here's what's going on in simple terms. Your unique Pokemon save file has a special number that I'm going to call the Shiny Door, and every new Pokemon that spawns comes with a key. Normally in the older games, with an odds of 1 in 8,192, if your Pokemon spawns with a key that matches your door, it will spawn as a shiny. Manaphy, however, will always transfer from Ranger with a key that does not match your door. So how do we get around this? You find more doors. If you trade the unhatched Manaphy egg to a different game, that new game might have a door that matches your key. Your odds of this new door working out is, you guessed it, 1 in 8,192. And all of a sudden, we have a viable hunting method, provided you have, at minimum, a completed Pokemon Ranger game that has not redeemed its egg yet, 2 Nintendo DSs, and 2 Generation 4 Pokemon games. You send the egg from Ranger to your main game, which we'll call Game A. Don't hatch it. Trade it to a new game, Game B. Then, hatch it in Game B. Quick side note, Manaphy will never be shiny in its hatching animation. You have to finish the animation, then check your party screen to see if it actually shines. Yes, the rarest shiny Pokemon is so cruel that you don't even get the satisfaction of twinkling stars on hatch. If it is not shiny, for the love of Arceus, do not save your game. Reset back to the last time you saved, which should be right when you got the egg in the first place at the trade area. Now back on Game A, we need to generate a new door. This means you need to delete your save file entirely, start a new save, then play the game until you're far enough to unlock trading. Trade the egg from B to A, then repeat the cycle. Hatching, checking, resetting, and playing a new save file up to the point of trading and trying again if the Manaphy doesn't shine. While you can use any Generation 4 game to run this hunt, the original Diamond and Pearl take the least amount of time to access trading, so they are highly recommended. It goes without saying that this is an absurd amount of hoops to jump through just to participate in a shiny hunt. It's like those hunts I talked about with long cutscenes for each spawn, except this time you have around a full episode of television between every attempt. Let me put it this way. You could watch the entire 1,000 plus episodes of One Piece while doing this hunt, and at average odds, you would be about 1/8 of the way done with this hunt. I mean, that's possible, but even hunting a couple of hours a day, a multiple year hunt is not out of the question. This method is excruciating beyond belief. So, of course, let's make it easier. For starters, hatching one egg at a time? That is insanity. How do we get more eggs? We get more Pokemon Rangers. So yeah, I feel like we're kind of glossing over this whole you have to play through an entire video game every time you want to spawn an egg thing. Ranger is a game that is pretty fun casually, pretty annoying when you're rushing through it, and downright exhausting when you're trying to play it back to back to back to try and pop these babies out. I'm not here to do a full review in the middle of my video, but hey, here's a little something. The sprite work is amazing. The plot and lore are about as thin as a Stunfisk, and the main mechanic of the game is interesting. I like the idea of a Pokemon game that features real-time combat and strategy. There's a huge collection of tough bosses with unique patterns, and that is a genuinely rare thing in this franchise. However, this is the touching is good era of the Nintendo DS, and this game requires you to furiously and meticulously encircle Pokemon dozens of times in a row in order to capture them. The future Ranger sequels would make this system a lot more fair and intuitive, but this first game requires you to hit all of your circles consecutively without ever lifting the stylus or bumping into a single obstacle to defeat them. You tap one wrong thing and you gotta start all over. There's no progress. Pair that with the fact that your assist Pokemon are a limited resource that can be exhausted, and I found myself needing to reset a lot of bosses on my first playthrough. Even worse when they're the kind that have a huge batch of unskippable dialogue and a cutscene before every fight. I think for some people, Pokemon Ranger actually might be a physical barrier to entry for even starting the hunt. To use the extremely cliche example, this is not Dark Souls. But it's hard enough that I remember friends who resorted to using an action replay to cheat through the game just to get their Manaphy. They even made a ROM hack to give it that easier capture system from the sequels. Now, I cannot speak for everyone, but for me personally, this was a physically painful experience to run through multiple times. I have carpal and cubital tunnel in my arm and wrist, which causes intense pain and swelling with repetitive hand motions. I also have very large hands and found it excruciating to play on the small 3DS, which is the only capture modded system that I own. Eventually, I had to settle for not recording most of my playthrough and playing off-screen on a 3DS XL with one of these thick boy styluses. It still hurt a lot. But if you can endure the game's 20 plus bosses, a sea of slow dialogue, and about 10-ish hours, you can generate your first Manaphy egg. Assuming, of course, that your cartridge's single egg has not been claimed yet. Okay, so we want more eggs, and we want them as fast as possible. Ideally, as cheaply as possible. For starters, you can make the actual hatching part of the process faster by pre-cooking your eggs. Normally, shiny hunters would use an ability like Flame Body to make eggs in your party hatch faster, but you don't even need to bother with that here. It's not an exact science, but Manaphy eggs take a bit over 2,500 steps to hatch. If you run steps off your egg though, the game will generally remember how far along you are on your hatch when you trade it to a new one. I have heard that you can actually overdo this and end up with eggs that hatch as soon as you take a single step after trading, but I ran about 2,000 steps off of each egg, and that seemed to be a nice conservative way to speed up the hatching process. The more eggs we have, the more we can hatch and trade at once to drastically cut down your hunting time. How do we ensure that we get more? There's a good way to check your Pokemon Ranger to see if it still has its single egg on it. When you boot up your game and you see the Ranger Net menu, that means your game is very likely to have already had its egg claimed. If there is no Ranger Net menu, then you have a 100% chance of an egg that is still good to go. If you're testing out friends' games or a used game store copy to check for the remaining egg, this is what you want to see. If you've been following along with me, I'm sure that there's a burning question in the back of your head. Isn't there a limited supply of Manaphy eggs in the world? Sure, the game sold about 3 million copies, but it's been many years, and sealed copies of the game are very rare and expensive. How many of the remaining used cartridges have been lost, discarded, or already had their single egg plucked away? This seems to be a hunt with a limited supply, only getting harder and harder every year as the supply of fresh eggs disappears. Are we headed directly toward a dystopian future where the cost of pure Ranger cartridges skyrockets due to limited supply? What is this, Pokemon cards? Thankfully, no, this is not the case. Depending on what you are comfortable with, generating Manaphy eggs can get a whole lot easier. Did you know it's actually really easy to hack your 3DS? Anyone can do it! While deleting your save file will not create a new Manaphy egg, wiping your entire cartridge's save data clean will. Whether it's a physical device or custom firmware, there are many ways to wipe a cartridge clean. You could play through Ranger and transfer an egg, wipe the cartridge, then play through the game again to make a new egg as many times as you like. Unless you absolutely believe that this hunt requires the purity of brand new copies of Pokemon Ranger. Calm down, Bezos. I actually think that you can argue that save wiping is an ethical way to get multiple Manaphy eggs. Why hoard a bunch of copies of the game to yourself? With cartridge wiping, you still have to do the same amount of gameplay, all while leaving more Ranger cartridges in the world for other people that actually want to own the game for themselves. But what if you don't want to play through all of Ranger a bunch of times? But you still want a bunch of eggs. Wouldn't that be interesting? Here's where things get a lot more ambiguously legitimate. Wiping a game save is not the only thing that you can do when modifying a cartridge. You can also create an entire save state, free to reload or transfer at any time. I'm not saying that this is legitimate or fair, but if you despise your first Pokemon Ranger playthrough with all your heart, you could theoretically beat the game one time, unlock the Manaphy egg, then create a save state. Now you can send the egg to a new game, reload the save state, send a new egg, reload the save state. You see where this is going. Beat Ranger one time and you could have access to infinite eggs with save states. You even get a different egg every time you transfer. But what if you wanted to beat Pokemon Ranger 0 times? It turns out that can be done too, if you lived during these specific windows of time. And that is because there are 2 other Pokemon Ranger games, the arguably superior Shadows of Almia and Guardian Signs. These games both have the Manaphy mission unlockable as well. There are 2 major differences between OG Ranger and its older brothers. The first is that the sequel games unlock the ability to redeem Manaphy way earlier than the OG Ranger. However, the more practical thing that distinguishes these games is that the first game's event can only be unlocked by typing in a password, while the sequels got their events distributed from a single Wi-Fi event that only existed during a small window of time 15 years in the past. Well, that doesn't sound very fair now, does it? If we knew what we know now about shiny hunting all those years ago, getting an egg supply would have been so much easier. If only there was a way to go back in time. Well, hold on to your Celebes because you can do just that. either by injecting an existing save, or even using a DNS exploit service like Wintr and a mobile hotspot to trick your game into thinking that it's receiving a legitimate event distribution over the internet. The long story short is that yes, you can pretend that you're getting those online exclusive events today without an actual time machine. So the question is, what do you consider fair? Actual hardware? Just save wiping? Save states? Event spoofing? I am not the shiny police. I feel like everyone should at least try the Ranger games, but that's because I think they're really underrated, and we're not really going to get that style of gameplay again without a dedicated touchscreen. But the true irony is that this whole game legitimacy conversation is pointless. You still gotta do the hunt. One of the biggest shiny Pokemon community figureheads to help me research and tackle this project was Sonikks. When I asked Sonikks about all these egg generation methods, here's what they had to say. There are a lot of ways to get the eggs now. It's one of those things where people will constantly debate legitimacy. I don't honestly care how people get the eggs because the hunt is long enough that I feel it's a pointless debate. If you want to be a little extra and play through Ranger 4 to 8 times, go for it. If you just want the eggs now, go for that too. Pokemon Ranger is exhausting, and dedicating dozens or even up to 100 hours to generate eggs is absolutely brutal. But all that time is a mere drop in the bucket compared to how long you can expect the full hunt to take. Like I mentioned, I would say it takes roughly 20 to 30 minutes to go through the full cycle of Manaphy egg hatching, generating a new save file, trading the eggs, the whole song and dance. This becomes fractionally less depending on how many eggs you're hunting at the same time. Unfortunately, there is a limit to how many eggs you can reasonably hatch in one cycle. For one, the maximum number of eggs that you can trade at one time at the trade station is 4 in these games. In addition, because you're booting up a brand new save every single time you want to run this hunt, you actually need to capture as many Pokemon as you want to trade for the eggs, since you'll be working with a brand new party every single time you run a new cycle. You can only afford about a dozen Pokeballs to start every new save file, so in general, accounting for the speed and potential error, trading those 4 eggs back and forth is the reasonable speed barrier between the two systems. For me, with 4 eggs at once, that meant about 7.5 minutes per egg attempt on average. You can push things even further, but only at the cost of money and sanity. Sonikks, for example, used 4 systems and 8 eggs, double my current setup. I personally found that playing with 2 systems and 4 eggs was already taking up my maximum amount of mental focus. And I don't even own 4 capture-ready 3DSs anyways. If I'm crazy enough to do this thing, I need to make sure that I capture that final moment on video. So, how much time are we looking at? 40 hours to play the Ranger games plus an average of about 7.5 minutes per egg. Assuming we get average luck, that's an expected total for me of... Assuming I hunt for 1 hour every single day, that would be an expected hunt time of almost 3 years. But hey, odds are a funny thing. Might take 10 minutes, might take 10 years. After all this research, preparation, and optimization, I had to give it a try. I know many of you are aware of this, but it has been over a year since my last upload. It's not the first time we've had a hiatus like this. It's usually when I have a full-time job, and full-time parenting is also on my plate, and I've told many of the stories that I've wanted to put out into the world already. But I never go a single day without thinking about a new, entertaining, insightful adventure to share with you all. My favorite videos have always been the ones where I push myself to try something wild, weird, something incomprehensible. Projects where I dig deeper and deeper into the subject matter, where they just become a part of my everyday life. The older and busier I get, the more I've become aware that every video I make could be my last. And if I'm going out, I want to be sure that I'm going out with a bang. It's been a long time now, and we've come such a long way from the days where we assumed that this hunt was impossible. But after just over 500 encounters, I quit. There's not really much I can say here, but if I had to put it all into one word, it would be oops. See, before I thought Manaphy was impossible, and so it was just an idea, a joke, fun little bit of trivia. But since learning that it's possible, it's just so much worse. It's a trap! You've seen the success stories, you pay the entry fee to play the game, and by the time you're in it, it's too late. One of the pitfalls as a long-form content creator is constantly wanting to one-up your last project, getting dumber and harder and crazier, chasing that high, trying to find new ways to top yourself. It's an obsession. For the course of a year, Manaphy became my Moby Dick. And as Moby says, you don't want to get Moby Dicked. After all that work, there was one major thing about this hunt that I was not prepared for. I don't like the hunt. It's not my cup of tea. Manaphy is not an active or passive enough hunt to hold my interest. I've talked in the past about how shiny hunting is an amazing passive activity, something that you do mindlessly while doing something else, like listening to a podcast, watching a show, chatting with friends, or doing a stream. Or it can be a fun activity to do by itself. I really liked the wormhole hunting for this reason because there was an interesting risk-reward and high score system that kept my brain stimulated enough to keep this thing going. Manaphy is neither of those things. Playing Diamond and Pearl up to the point of unlocking trading over and over again is excruciating. It's a really slow intro. There is a small incentive to the hunt where you have a chance to find a shiny starter or a shiny wild Pokemon along the way, but I was not lucky enough in my relatively small investment of time to see one. It's also stressful. You cannot for any reason save after hatching your eggs or accidentally take extra steps and cook your eggs too far prior to retrading. This was the first shiny hunt where I just wasn't having fun. I now fully understand why shiny Manaphy is such a brutal undertaking, and despite everything, this hunt may not be the hardest for everybody. You know how it is, maybe you'll get lucky. You could get it in one encounter, and that is totally within the realm of possibility. Funnily enough, I don't think anyone would believe you if you got it in just one encounter, but it is possible. I don't regret learning about how this hunt works. I definitely don't regret talking with shiny hunters within the community to hear their stories. And I don't even regret playing through Pokemon Ranger. The first time anyways. But if I spend any more time trying to hunt this thing instead of doing something that I will enjoy or something that will help me grow as a person, I would regret it. I'm not just gonna do this thing for the content. So that's the story, right? Self-acceptance, learning how to let go, appreciating the journey, even if you don't reach the destination, yada yada. Well, I started putting this video together, script done, recorded the raw audio for my first video in over a year, and what do I see in the recommended tab? Oh no. Oh no. Trails Pokemon enlisted the help of the Pokemon programming community to create box after box of non-hacked shiny Manaphy inside of a modern Pokemon game. Are you telling me I spent all that time so long on this hunt that they found an easy way to pop it out while I was working? I'm gonna be sick. This is a tragedy. You don't need Ranger. You don't need to restart the game after game after game. You don't need to optimize eggs. It's so simple. All you need to do is
head 512 steps south. After we input all of the dots in the .artist app correctly, this code is massive after all. Mourn the loss of our nurse Blaziken. Highlight days 2, 4, 9 through 12, and 14 through 24. Here we'll see some lights, and we're actually on the top floor of a Pokemon Center. Once here, we're going to change our Pokédex to app, both having their own pros and cons when using them.
Oh, okay. Well, here we go again. Oh man. Uffy.